The Supreme Court heard oral arguments in two cases challenging affirmative action in college admissions. The High Court's now conservative majority could end the use of race as a factor when considering students at public and private universities. Naomi Ruckham has the details.
I've heard the word diversity quite a few times, and I don't have a clue what it means.
Affirmative action is on the line at colleges and universities across the nation. Monday, Supreme Court justices heard arguments in two pivotal cases from Harvard and the University of North Carolina. Both schools consider race among other factors when admitting students.
When does it end? When is your sunset? When will you know?
The attorney arguing against UNC's policy said while culture could theoretically be considered in admissions, race should not. Liberal Justice Elena Kagan responded.
The race is part of the culture, and the culture is part of the race, isn't it? I mean, that's slicing the bologna awfully thin.
Later, conservative Justice Samuel Alito had this exchange with the attorney defending the UNC policy about when an applicant can identify as part of a minority group.
Let's say the student has one grandparent who falls within that class. Can the student claim to be a member of an underrepresented minority?
Yes, we rely on self-reporting.
One great-great-grandparent. You're going to make me continue to go on.
Right.
In the last 20 years, the Supreme Court has upheld affirmative action twice, most recently in 2016. But the court's new solidly conservative majority could lead to a new ruling.
It's overwhelmingly likely / certain that the Supreme Court is going to end race-based affirmative action, as certain as it was that they were going to reverse Roe v. Wade.
Newly appointed Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, the first black woman to serve on the court, emphasized race was just one factor.
When you give your race, you're not getting any special points. It's being treated just on par with other factors in the system.
The Supreme Court is expected to make a decision next spring. Naomi Ruckham, CBS News.
And 9 states already prohibit any consideration of race in admissions to public colleges and universities. Well, former President Donald Trump doesn't want his tax returns released. His legal team filed an emergency request with the Supreme Court today after a federal appeals court cleared the way last week for the returns to be disclosed to the House Ways and Means Committee. The House has tried a number of avenues over the years to get a look at Trump's returns. Trump has requested the court put an administrative hold on the release of the tax returns by Wednesday, and that is because Thursday is when the ruling allowing for their disclosure goes into effect. And if you had problems with your Instagram account, you weren't alone today. About 7,000 Instagram users reported issues accessing the social media platform. And this morning, Instagram confirmed in a tweet it was looking into the issue and apologized for the inconvenience.